I'm terrible at pimping my stuff, so I thought dressing like a pimp might make it a little bit easier. I have blogs where you can read stuff and see things and interact with me. My main one is postmortemstudios.wordpress.com. My writing one and sort of diary blog is over at talesofgrim.wordpress.com. Hope to see you there. Racism. Now that the demonetization's out the way, let's get into it. If you're anything like me at all, then you have always considered racism to be rather stupid. Differences in skin colour and so on are very superficial. Culture is not determined by genes. So the idea of being prejudiced against someone because of their race just feels incredibly dumb. And there's so little difference between the different human races that it's barely worth mentioning. There's a few differences that manifest at extremes, like Olympic sport or the very far end of our medical capabilities, such as transplant compatibility and so on. But by and large, for the most part, humans are pretty much the same, regardless what colour skin and so on they have. In any meaningful way, race is meaningless. And Britain is pretty non-racist, all things considered, though you wouldn't know it to look at the news and the buzz online lately. Britain has been called, well, apocryphally called 100% racist by Stormzy, even though that's not what he meant and not what he said. But people have picked up and run with that. There have been racism issues at football matches, with players being hooted and hollered at and having things thrown at them. And of course there's the whole Harry and Meghan thing, which I really don't want to comment on, but it kind of demands some sort of comment from someone like me who comments on politics and social issues, amongst everything else that I do. And of course Brexit appears to have unleashed a certain amount of, well, not exactly racism, but xenophobia, though racists seem to have felt empowered by what happened there. I think it's important to remember, however, that even when the Tories went overtly racist, they only got around 42% of the national vote. Only about 1/3 of the country ever backed Brexit, and that has shrunk. And we have a history that is a lot more tolerant and accepting, you know, not without racism, but a lot less racist than the US. And it's my feeling that a lot of the modern kind of woke activism in the UK is making the same mistake now that a lot of American activism has made around this, in that they're confusing wealth and class issues for race issues. And wealth and class issues are far more of a big divisor than race is. It's often gets muddled up because of immigration and other issues, but by and large I think it's not race. It's wealth, it's class, it's social precariousness, it's the dissolution of the welfare state, these ideas that tabloids feed that immigrants are taking your jobs, and then immigration and race gets conflated, and it's a mess. But when you really drill down into it, it's a wealth and class issue. Now, most recently this has been coming up obviously around Harry and Meghan, but you have to kind of delve in a bit deeper. You often hear this idea that you should just listen to people of colour or whoever else who claim that they're experiencing racism, and you should just take whatever they say at face value. This is the I believe women of race relations. Well, I don't believe women, I believe evidence, and I don't believe someone based on the colour of their skin. That would be racist, genuinely racist. So we have to just look at the evidence. And if I were to have to accept a person of colour's experience on face value because of their colour, because of their lived experience, then I would also have to take the explanations and excuses of the person accused of being racist at face value, and to just believe them. Now, it is possible for someone to experience racism from a comment that someone did not intend as racist. Okay, you have a message, your message passes through a medium, it's then received and interpreted by the person at the other end. So you can say something not intending it to be racist, but it can then be decoded and received by someone else as racist. I'm not sure how good an example of this is, but Danny Baker has a long online history of sharing pictures of monkeys and chimps dressed as people and addressing them to actual situations. Apparently, I don't particularly follow Danny Baker, but I did follow this scandal when it came up. And he did put out a picture that showed, it was from the 1930s, I think, black and white, posh-looking couple holding hands with a chimp that was dressed in a hat and coat and so on. And like I say, apparently he has a long history of doing this, and it's just something he does. He finds them funny. But because he said that this was the royal baby emerging from hospital, referring to Harry and Meghan, I believe, this was immediately picked up on as being racist. Now, contextually, he has a long string of these images that he's posted for years, which have not been considered racist, and then suddenly in this instance, in this context, it's received as racist. It's pretty obvious why it would be received as racist, but in courts, you know, you have the act itself and you have the intent behind the act. Was that intended to be racist? I personally doubt it. People close to him say he doesn't display any racism in his regular life, in his language and so on. But it was received as racist for obvious reasons, you know, historical comparisons between apes and black people and so on. But he never intended it to be racist. Should he have known? Probably. He should have known and appreciated the context and the issue and everything there. But I don't think that was actually racist. I don't think it was intended to be racist, but it was still received that way. But there is no forgiveness, there is no benefit of the doubt. The mob will not be appeased by anything other than someone's head. And so he lost his job. But yeah, whether that's entirely accurate or not, that story, I think it does illustrate at least the possibility that someone can communicate something in a way that is then received and decoded as racist, but isn't. And it does present this problem quite well. Should we just listen to someone describing whatever they experience as being sexist, racist, homophobic, or whatever, and should we listen to the reasons that the person on the other end is giving, and to which side do we give the benefit of the doubt? Well, generally someone is considered innocent until proven guilty, so it would seem to me that we should presume more on the side of someone not being racist. Of course, sometimes it's blatantly obvious that someone is genuinely being racist and they're just looking for excuses or whatever. But by and large, you know, we should, logically, ethically, consider someone innocent until they're proven guilty. Of course, there's nothing more insulting than being told, oh, I'm sorry you were upset. Not, I'm sorry I upset you, but I'm sorry you were upset. But that's the way it goes. Now, tied up into all of this is this redefinition of racism. It's deemed acceptable to be racist towards white people. Indeed, it's even denied that you can be racist towards white people. And this is due to a rather narrow, pseudo-academic redefinition of the word racism to mean prejudice plus power. But even if we take that definition and we look at the real world and we see where the most racist people are, they're not powerful people. They're not people in control of society. They're most often the poorest, the least educated. If we go back to football crowds, football fans tend to come from more amongst the working class and underclass than the other strata of society. The people with the least power, the people who are most precarious, the people who are most worried about lack of jobs and lack of social investment and so on in their area, though they don't necessarily articulate it that way. They have no power, but they're extremely racist. To redefine racism in that way makes it seem like they have power, which isn't true, and also excuses racism the other way. And we do have this atmosphere where it's completely acceptable to be outrageously and egregiously racist towards white people, and we're even told that you can't be racist towards white people. but even the slightest hint of a possibility of prejudice in the other direction, even if it's just interpersonal prejudice, and that's it. Now, I'm of the opinion that racism of any kind, from any race towards any race, is unacceptable. Whether it's the Nation of Islam's beliefs about white people, whether it's white supremacists' beliefs about black people. Of course, white supremacist is losing its sting now because merely being white is seen as somehow white supremacy, or a white person wielding power of any kind is seen as white supremacy. Yeah, this racism towards white people is accepted and championed and boosted all the time. Now, here's the problem with this. The redefinition of racism to exclude racism towards white people. The redefinition of racism so that it becomes acceptable from minorities towards majorities. And just the sheer acceptability of this anti-white racism creates a really fertile ground for genuine racism from white people towards others. Because they're seen as having this license, this support, this capability to be horrendous towards whites. And in this atmosphere, nonsensical ideas like white supremacy, like treachery narratives, a lot of the kind of ideas of conspiracies, you know, cultural Marxism, all that. The fact that it's okay to be racist towards white people and barely a peep is heard really helps recruit disaffected white people into these genuinely noxious white supremacist movements and racist parties and groups. Yeah, why should black people be able to get away with it? Why should the Nation of Islam or the black Hebrew Israelites be allowed to get away with being outrageously and openly racist in a way that white people aren't? You know, it starts people considering that maybe there is something to these conspiratorial ideas that the world is being set up to overwhelm, or white genocide, or all the other nonsense. Right? It creates sympathy for those ideas, and every time you call someone racist who isn't racist, you're creating sympathy in them towards genuine racists. Because if they're being accused of racism, and they're not, and they know that they're not, yeah, they start to distrust those accusations of racism towards genuine racists, to become more sympathetic, more open, more understanding, more willing to listen to them. And that's profoundly dangerous. We're not America. Now, I don't doubt that there is racism here, but the American analysis, which is wrong even in America, I think, certainly doesn't apply here. If we go back to Meghan again, and Harry, I mean, he's literally the red-headed stepchild and probably a bastard, so that's part of it. But, you know, she's not from a good English family. She's not from nobility or one of the upper-class families in the UK. Yeah, he's married out and he's married down. And we have our own historical examples of when someone has gone and married down to a divorcee, no less, and an American, and there's been uproar and they've been forced to abdicate the throne. So I think it seems to be much more about class issues. She's not good enough, he's married down. That's the issue driving a lot of the hatred and distaste towards Meghan, I think. So, not to say that there isn't also racial animus. Certainly, I've seen it. I've read it. Certainly, some of the Sun headlines and Daily Mail headlines certainly skirt that edge. But for a lot of people, I don't think it is. And if you cry racism when it's not obvious that it is racism, and when you start crying white supremacy and so on, all you're going to do is create more sympathy, more openings for genuine white supremacy. And this is why I talk about and I debunk these other things. And I'm only running into this because of my staunch anti-Brexit stance. Facebook and other areas seem to have decided that I've flipped politically. Though I'm still the same as I always was. I was never right-wing at all. I've just never been on board with this whole woke thing. I think racism is terrible, whether it's white people doing it to black people doing it to white people. Whichever way, it's wrong. It's universally wrong. and it's prejudice on the basis of race. And when you redefine it, when you excuse it in certain directions, all you're doing is empowering the very people that you're seeking to disempower. Stop it. Please. I think we're seeing the repercussions of this approach in Trump and Brexit and Boris Johnson, and they show how an activated minority of bigots can sway everyone else, because good people don't work together and don't agree. So we're in a very dangerous and precarious position, and I'm afraid I blame wokeness for much of that. We don't have a lot of time to get our act together and unify against these negative forces in a more intelligent and effective way. Zang. Postmortem Studios is my personal imprint where I create role-playing games, stories, card games, board games, and more. You can get them at RPG Now, DriveThruRPG, Lulu.com, and some on Amazon. Role-playing games to die for.
It's time for you boys to share my last taste of the true black meat. Flesh of the giant aquatic Brazilian centipede.